844. The care regulator for England has told you and yours it's taking very seriously reports that vulnerable people in residential homes have been victims of revenge evictions. Last week we reported on new research which found that nearly 6,000 people had been given notices to leave care homes in England last year. That is 1 in every 70 residents. The figures came through a Freedom of Information request to the Care Quality Commission from King's College London. Mike Padgham is the Managing Director of St Cecilia's Care Group. He owns 5 care homes in North Yorkshire. And Helen Wildbore is Director of the Residents and Relatives Association. It's a charity that campaigns for older people in care homes. Welcome to you both. Helen, if I could start with you. Since our story last week, I know that you have met with the regulator, the Care Quality Commission, to discuss what could be done to try to stop revenge evictions. Tell me how you got on.
Yeah, thanks for having us back on to talk about this. We did meet the CQC, the regulator for England, last week, and we started that meeting by talking about how we have to remember these are people in the most desperate of situations, people who are experiencing poor care, whether that's abuse, neglect. It might not be a serious incident, but a number of smaller concerns that have built up to cause harm. And it's the CQC's job to protect people from poor care. So when people are raising concerns and then facing eviction as a result, they should expect that their regulator will have their back and will be a place of support. But sadly, that's not the case. Too often our helpline hears from people who never hear back from the CQC. The CQC told them they just don't deal with complaints or no actions taken to help them. And CQC's inaction on this has created a hole where people tell us they feel bereft, they feel powerless, and the CQC are leaving people to fight their own battles for what are basic rights, a basic level of care that we should all expect. And so we told the CQC last week they need to urgently fill that void and they need to get a handle on this situation. Because we have been hearing from people who complain about care at a home, and then afterwards the person they are concerned about is just given a notice to quit that is a notice that only lasts for 28 days, 28 days to go. Now, the Care Quality Commission told you and yours they want to work with you to make improvements, and they say they have discussed how they can improve their data analysis to better support people who have concerns about their relatives' care. What might they do there? Well, I mean, we wrote to the CQC off the back of this research, and we made 7 recommendations to them. They were about finding out the extent of the problem, as you say, and the CQC told us last week that there will be changes coming on board around their data collection, but those changes are coming in over the next year. So we might, in a year's time, have better data on this, which is just completely unacceptable. They're also relying on us doing more research on this to try and fill the gap that they've left in that data. Other recommendations were around acting urgently on reports of evictions, and the CQC has committed to remind their inspectors to do so. CQC's own audit recently found that they must do more when people raise concerns with them, and then they're not doing enough to support people. But we also had other recommendations about what CQC can do to request more information from providers more regularly. At the moment, providers only have to provide that information on an annual basis, and they don't have to supply any evidence alongside those reports of asking people to leave their home. And CQC, I'm afraid there's no urgency from the CQC on this. It took 6 weeks for us to get the meeting after writing to them. And that meeting very much focused on what they can't do, not on what they can do and what they should be doing right now. Mike Padgham, you run a chain of 5 care homes. Do you accept it's tempting for some care home owners to just use an eviction notice if someone is complaining about the quality of care?
I think sadly, good afternoon, I think sadly that is the case in some areas, which is wrong, of course, because this is the resident's own home and you shouldn't just be asked to leave because you make a valid complaint about the quality of care. And I would like to see the balance more equal in a relationship between the care home and the relative, because I think that's extremely important. The system does need strengthening, I agree with that.
Let me bring Bernadette into the discussion. She's one of several listeners who got in touch after hearing our report last week. Her mum is 93 and she was given 28 days notice to leave a care home last month. Her mother has Parkinson's disease. She's been living in that care home for 4 years. Bernadette, tell us what led to this home serving notice on your mum, telling her that she must go.
Well, I think what led to it was that at the end of January, I made a complaint to the home about my mother's care. As you mentioned, she's 93, she's very frail with Parkinson's, and in January she became very unwell with a chest infection. During that time, I was going in more regularly, and I was concerned about the lack of staff within the care home. There had been problems, I think, there since about November of last year, and it became clear that there really wasn't management present, and that the care staff, although they were very nice and helpful, they were in insufficient numbers. They didn't have any leadership. And in one particular week when my mother was very poorly, I just thought, I cannot in all conscience let this go without a written complaint. I had for 4 years bitten my tongue many a time, as I think everyone with someone in a care home has to do. But I'd gone in over a period of a week and found that she'd become so weak. She wasn't able to eat by herself, which she normally would. I had to hold cups to her lips so that she could get her soup and her fluids. She had cups of tea left cold out of her reach. So she didn't have enough food or fluids. And this became of such concern to me. I was in there one day, I remember, for about 4 hours trying to deal with it. And I went home, and an hour later, I got a phone call from the home that she'd fallen out of bed.
Tell me, what was it like trying to find a new home for her, Bernadette, when they told you that she had to go?
Well, my brother was telephoned by the care home manager because I had asked for an assessment for my mother in March, and I think she took that as some sort of provocation. And she telephoned my brother and said that we would have to have a meeting because she'd had a discussion with me on the phone, and I wasn't happy. We had an assessment meeting, and then a day after that, the manager phoned my brother at home and said, your mother's going to be evicted. And of course, I not only had to explain this to my mother and give her the eviction letter, but I had to run around and try and find a new care home. Fortunately, 2 of the ones that I looked at had a vacant bed, and it was the one that I preferred and thought was better. But I don't know what we would have done if they hadn't had a vacancy.
Bernadette, thank you. Mike Padgham, we heard Helen Wildbore say that that the care homes have all the cards, and that the regulator, the Care Quality Commission, is not in a hurry to do anything about this. This business of the 28 days eviction notice, that is something that the Care Quality Commission told us that is just in law. So to change that, the government would have to change the powers of the Care Quality Commission. Would you welcome that?
Yes, I think that we need to make sure the system is better, and the balance, as I said just now, is more equal between the care home and the resident. But I think my view is that CQC can change things. Things can be done if they have a mind to do it. Of course, in the research, it said the vast majority of homes are acting with integrity, which is a good thing, but we need to eradicate the poor care because it doesn't help the rest of us trying to do the best we can in difficult circumstances. But I'd welcome, I think came out of the report, is perhaps a mediation service might help between voters and providers to make things work better, but definitely strengthen it. And I think if CQC want to do something, they certainly can.
Bernadette, many of the care homes say that they're asking people to move on because their needs are greater. Was there any question of that with your mum? You said that she was really ill at the time when you said that they weren't looking after her properly, no one helping her to eat or drink. Could it be that she just was too unwell for them to cope with her anymore?
No, that certainly wasn't the case. Over a period of weeks and into March, she became very much better, although she remained immobile. And the reason that my brother was given, and that was given in the letter to my mother, was that the relationship between the management and her daughter had broken down. So they can say that about any family. It's just an excuse. It's not a reason, it's an excuse. If you say anything, if you complain, if you ask questions, your persona non grata or your relative is. My poor 93-year-old mother had done nothing. And it's dangerous moving elderly, frail people. But she was better. So they didn't argue it was about care. It was about me.
Mike Padgham, do you think there is some care home owners also say, well, the relationship with the family had broken down. But even so, it's wrong to punish the resident for that, isn't it?
Yes, and I think that's why I think some sort of mediation, if necessary, but providers want to make sure, why would you want to do anything else other than make sure you're giving good care and you've got a good relationship with the family? So you should be a last resort. If things do break down, you should try stretch every sinew to make sure that you can communicate and help, because, as has been said many times, it's the resident's home. We have to remember that, and we should go to the ends of the earth to make sure we can deliver something. Sadly, in some cases, it's not always possible to get the relationship right, but more than 28 days is definitely needed. People need to be given the time to find the right place, of course, as long as the care is determined is right for everybody and can be given safely, because sometimes people's circumstances do change and they need more specialist care. So it's a very fine balance to get, but fundamentally the residents' rights need to be protected.
Helen Wildbore, briefly before we leave it, you said you made 7 recommendations. Is there one of them that you would prioritise and say just do that as a matter of urgency?
I think CQC need to do something. They need to put out a very strong statement to providers. As Mike says, the majority of them are acting according to the law. The minority are not, and they're giving everybody else in the sector a bad name. CQC needs to put out a very strong statement to those providers that they are on this and that they will take action against inappropriate evictions.
Helen Wildbore, Mike Padgham, Bernadette, thank you. We contacted the Department for Health and Social Care to ask if they're considering bringing in any new law to protect care home residents. They didn't respond to that, but they told us that they think no one should be unfairly evicted. And clauses about evictions, they said, should be clearly set out in contracts that residents sign on entering care homes. You're listening to You and Yours. It's 18 minutes past 12.